What comes to mind when you think of October? Pumpkins, candy, cooler temperatures, bright blue skies. October can be beautiful in North Carolina, but it's still hurricane season, and sometimes October can be deadly. When Hurricane Matthew hit our state on October 8th and 9th of 2016, it wasn't a strong hurricane. In fact, it didn't even make the top 10 for intensity. And yet, Matthew's legacy of record flooding is crystal clear. You see, a hurricane's damage is not just a function of strength at landfall, it's a function of everything that happened before landfall. As much as we dread tropical systems, they are sometimes necessary to restore the balance of moisture. They can save us from drought, given the right conditions. Of course, the key is to just get the leftover rain and not the full brunt of the storm. In August of 2016, the cities of Raleigh, Roanoke Rapids, even Kinston recorded below normal rainfall. Greenville was over 3 inches below normal for the month. But by September, the tropics were becoming more active. Hurricane Hermine made landfall in Florida, the first storm to do so in 11 years. She tracked inland and weakened into a tropical storm, spawning multiple tornadoes near the North Carolina coast. But Hermine also brought rain, between 4 and 9 inches to be exact. Parts of Carteret County picked up over 13 inches. And just days after Hermine dissipated, a new tropical storm named Julia formed near the Florida coast. She remained weak and fell apart before drifting into North Carolina, but the leftover moisture combined with a nearby front, bringing up to 17 inches of new precipitation in Bertie County alone. The Kashai River rose nearly 3 feet above major flood stage, devastating homes and businesses. Counties that had needed rain just a few weeks before now had a surplus. There was just no room for any more. And then came Matthew.
Although the Atlantic season peaks in mid-September, late-season hurricanes are not uncommon. Like many, Matthew started as little more than a tuft of clouds in the Atlantic, but ocean temperatures were warm and the clouds grew. By September 28th, Tropical Storm Matthew was born. Weather conditions didn't favor rapid intensification, but Matthew didn't seem to care. In just 2 days, the system exploded into a Category 5 hurricane. At peak intensity on October 1st, Matthew's sustained winds reached 160 miles an hour with much higher gusts. As the storm churned through the Caribbean, photographers on nearby islands captured an eerie sight: lightning sprites. This phenomenon occurs when charged particles interact with gases in the atmosphere. Sprites are rarely photographed, but of course, Matthew was an unusual storm. It became the southernmost Category 5 hurricane ever recorded in an Atlantic season. Matthew's size and strength were intimidating enough, but for North Carolinians, there was something familiar about the path. Matthew's trajectory was similar to Hurricane Hazel in 1954. Hazel was also an October hurricane of considerable strength and eventually made landfall in North Carolina. A side-by-side comparison shows just how similar these two systems really were in the Caribbean. Both Hazel and Matthew devastated Haiti, killing or injuring over 1,000 residents. But it's here that the similarities begin to fade. Once Matthew cleared Haiti, it developed quite differently from Hazel, and forecasters would have a hard time keeping up with the changes.
October 1st, 2016. It was fair season in eastern North Carolina. In Goldsboro, crowds took to the Midway at the Wayne County Fairgrounds. It was an evening filled with food, music, and of course, rides. Just a couple of miles up the road, the mighty Neuse River flowed smoothly along. All was quiet, but residents noticed the water level was running high. And with Hurricane Matthew churning somewhere in the Caribbean, forecasters were taking notice too. You may not realize this, but even when a hurricane is weeks away, the WNCT Not On Your Side First Alert Weather Team is already tracking that storm around the clock.
We can't wait until the storm hits to formulate a plan. For starters, we have families too. We have to make sure they're in a safe location. We have to buy supplies, board up our homes, the same thing as you do. But we actually have to do those things much earlier because when the storm does threaten, we have to be here in the studio tracking it. We also have to know where to deploy our crews when the storm hits. Now, to accomplish all this, we have daily weather briefings for our entire staff, from our maintenance department to our general manager, each day leading up to when the storm makes landfall. One of the things that struck me about the briefings we gave during Hurricane Matthew was how much that forecast path was changing from day to day. Now, this is the briefing from October 3rd when Matthew was located still south of Haiti.
See how the forecast calls for the center to remain well east of Florida? By the next day, the official track had shifted back to the west. By the next day, the official track looped off the coast. So why all the variability? Well, tracking a hurricane is like playing pinball. Inside the machine, the path of the ball is determined by the objects it encounters. A hurricane's path is determined by the weather features around it, whether it be a nearby cold front or high pressure system. So to accurately forecast the hurricane, you have to accurately forecast everything around it. Now, this is a challenge, even for the best computer models. And there's always the random factor. Just like a glancing blow may redirect a pinball, an odd weather feature can change a storm track. And Matthew was full of oddities, even in appearance. A nearly constant blob of thunderstorms was found east of Matthew's center. Researchers speculate it was the result of some type of convergence zone. It's uncertain if features like this can affect the accuracy of predictions. That's one reason why any hurricane forecast contains a cone of uncertainty. It's a shaded area that shows the margin of error. And whenever North Carolina falls in that zone, we have to be ready. In most of the forecasts leading up to Matthew, some part of the North Carolina coast was highlighted. So regardless of final track, Matthew would at least bring heavy rain. And with rivers already nearing capacity, rain was the one thing we simply could not take.
After clearing Cuba on October 5, 2016, Matthew started a final approach to the United States. Florida was first in line, but the dangerous right front quadrant stayed offshore. In a northward moving hurricane, the highest wind and surge potential is found on the right side. Here, forward motion combines with counterclockwise circulation to boost wind and water. The right front quadrant often spawns tornadoes, and that's why the path of the eye is so critical. As Matthew pushed by the Georgia coast, forecasters were predicting a turn to the northeast. But would it happen soon enough to spare North Carolina from a landfall? While we waited, time ran out for South Carolina. At 11 a.m. on October 8th, Hurricane Matthew made landfall near McClellanville. Significant damage was reported, but Matthew had weakened dramatically. By the time the eye was offshore of Calabash, North Carolina, it was barely a hurricane at all, with sustained winds down to 75 miles per hour. While this seemed like good news, a weakening system tends to unwrap. Rain bands spread over a much larger area, interacting with nearby disturbances. In the case of Matthew, the massive rain shield covered at least 9 states, with nearly half recording 10 inches of rainfall or more. By late afternoon on October 8th, torrential downpours reached a peak in the WNCT Not On Your Side viewing area. Flash flooding left cars submerged in the middle of busy streets. And to make matters worse, Matthew's predicted turn wasn't happening fast enough to protect us from tornadoes. Multiple tornado warnings were issued and storm winds downed trees, knocking out power across several counties. But one question remained: would Matthew make landfall in our state?
Hurricane Matthew had multiple landfalls, including Haiti, Cuba, the Bahamas, and South Carolina. Although the eye never officially came ashore in North Carolina, it came about as close as you can get. This map shows the eye passing just miles offshore of Cape Lookout before turning to the east and eventually out to sea. But sometimes our eyes can deceive, especially when it comes to hurricanes. Take a look at this satellite loop of Matthew. Looks like the storm actually heads north into New England, doesn't it? When storms weaken, they often become extratropical. In other words, they begin to interact or connect with nearby fronts. This distorts the symmetry of the storm, and thunderstorms may drift away from the center. So even though Matthew pushed east of Hatteras, it forgot to take some of its rainfall with it. The storm managed to create record surge along the Outer Banks, and wind gusts over 80 miles an hour occurred in Dare County. Strong winds continued well into Sunday morning, October 9th. But by late afternoon, conditions were improving. The sun was back out and much of the flash flooding had receded, but the real flood, that was yet to come. Before Matthew, the worst flooding disaster in North Carolina history was Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Like Matthew, Floyd's damage was the result of many factors. A hurricane named Dennis had struck just weeks before, bringing over 10 to 15 inches of rain. Combined with the 20-plus inches of rain from Floyd, the result was what hydrologists call a 500-year flood. We would probably never see that kind of flooding again in our lifetime, or would we?
River forecasting is not as simple as it may seem. When heavy rain falls over land, the water begins a complex journey down streets, through fields, over ditches, snaking its way to our streams and rivers. This doesn't happen right away. It may take days, even after the storm leaves, for rivers to crest. After Floyd departed in 1999, residents were caught off guard. The sun was out, but water levels were still rising. As bad as the flooding was, many lessons were learned. We had a high water mark to gauge future storms. And when the floodwaters started to rise in the wake of Hurricane Matthew, this time we had a plan. Matthew dumped 5 to 12 inches of rain across most of the WNCT-9 viewing area. Parts of Wayne County exceeded 15 inches. Along with totals from September, these numbers were fed into river models and compared with historical data from Floyd. Hydrologists were then able to help leaders plan evacuations and provide a more detailed crest prediction. Was it perfect? Well, no forecast will ever be perfect, but it was the best river prediction ever given for an event of this magnitude in our state. And few would deny it probably saved lives. The Neuse River in Kinston crested at 28.6 feet, almost a foot higher than the record set by Hurricane Floyd. The Neuse also topped the all-time mark in Goldsboro. The Tar River in Greenville peaked over 5 feet above major flood stage. Rivers and creeks nearly everywhere spilled their banks from Contentnia Creek near Hookerton to the Kashai River near Windsor, from the northeast Cape Fear River at Chinquapin to Swift Creek at Streets Ferry. The numbers are impressive, but the images are unforgettable. For many North Carolinians, it's the allure of the water that keeps them here. From the ocean to the sounds, lakes to rivers, communities thrive along our waterways.
You're absolutely right, David. And even when the residents leave for a time, they always seem to come back. But when storms like Matthew come along, those same rivers that bring us home can keep us from it.
It's amazing just how many roads pass over water. Lenoir and Wayne counties are good examples. In order to get from the northern end of the county to the southern end, you have to cross over the Neuse River somewhere. At the height of Matthew's flooding, nearly every possible route was submerged. A single gallon of water weighs a little over 8 pounds. Now imagine dumping over 13 trillion gallons of water across the southeastern United States. It's no wonder that roads buckled and gave way. Matthew's flooding left residents cut off from their homes, and detour signs would still be common nearly a year later. For some towns along the way, hard decisions had to be made. Seven Springs is located snugly between Kinston and Mount Olive, on the banks of the Neuse River. It's one of dozens of towns devastated by Matthew.
Average water depth in there, varied between 5 to 6 feet, damaging approximately probably 90 to 95% of all the structures in Seven Springs.
Mayor Stephen Potter is determined to rebuild.
Several of us have come back, but there's still the bulk of the people have not.
They're tired of the loss and they're ready to move out. It is a substantial loss to them as far as population.
Despite the devastation that still remains, there have been some positives in recent months. The post office is staying put, albeit from a temporary location for now, and one restaurant has managed to reopen here. But Potter and others know they face an uphill battle to save their town.
We're the oldest settlement in Wayne County.
Some fear a lack of residents and a lack of revenue could eventually force the town to turn in its charter. But Potter has no intention of doing that.
We have enough fund balance to keep us afloat for a while. I don't think there's any need for anyone to rush off and do anything with our town charter.
In a rather ironic twist of fate, the Neuse River, yes, this very river which got them into this mess in the first place, it may ultimately end up being this town's saving grace.
We will reinvent ourselves, I think, if we are going to move forward. We're going to have to change our focus from a residential community to a recreational one. And so what we're trying to put in RV sites, campsites, that will still keep that peaceful, quiet, small town life.
Of course, Seven Springs was not the only community to suffer loss. There were many others, including Princeville and Edgecombe County. Officials estimate that at least half of the 750 homes had flood damage.
Princeville is no stranger to historic flooding. When Hurricane Floyd struck in 1999, it nearly destroyed the town. Floodwaters lasted for 10 days, but determined residents kept the spirit of Princeville alive. Determination is a quality common among North Carolinians, and it has to be. We may enjoy many quiet years, but there will always be one more storm on the horizon.
Hurricane Matthew proved that a storm's damage is not just a function of strength. Although the storm weakened on approach to our state, the economic loss was measured in billions. Incidentally, the name Matthew will never again be used for an Atlantic hurricane. It was retired from use, taking its place in the record books alongside Hazel, Fran, Floyd, among others. Matthew is now part of our history and another lesson learned for the future. From all of us here at WNCT 9 on your side and the First Alert Weather Team, I'm Chief Meteorologist Jerry Jackson. Thank you for joining us.